Miranda is the founder of Melbourne Farmers Markets, which is a not-for-profit initiative connecting urban communities and Victorian farmers through local produce. Miranda is a retired chef, caterer, food writer, and has cheerfully devoted 25 professional years to Melbourne's food industry. Farmers markets are the culmination of her interest in Victorian producers and the edible spoils of every season. It's Miranda's quest to provide opportunities for everyone who eats to access and enjoy and afford fresh food. Miranda will be talking about the Melbourne Farmers Markets, the growth of local and seasonal shopping, and how all this ties in with education. Please welcome Miranda.
Thanks, Yasmin. It's fantastic to be here, and the fact that it is called a conversation series, I think, is probably one of the most important aspects about it, because when it comes to food, it is something that we all do, we all share, and the more that we continue to talk about it, the more we'll resolve the ever-growing issues that are developing in the food sector, unbeknown to some of us, but of great importance in the real scheme of things to all of us. So I'm involved in the farmers market sector of the food industry, which is minuscule in overall terms. As we know, there's enormous domination of a couple of large players who might as well remain nameless. We know who they are, and through history, our relationship with food and our means of production and our ways of accessing food have changed dramatically. But we're at a bit of a crossroads, because in some ways we're losing a very local industry with a shift towards a very industrialised system. So that's the heavy duty stuff. But the farmers market sector where I'm involved is very challenging, but incredibly positive, because it continues to build the relationships of people through both the pleasure and the education of food. A farmers market by definition, and it's important to us that it's quite strict, is specifically a place, a hub, a gathering place where predominantly that farmers, primary producers, come together and meet their customer face to face. So the hallmark of it is that there are no resellers or wholesalers, and the food is exchanged directly from the person who makes or grows the produce themselves. We have a number of sectors within that, where there are people who might be like Eric, who Yasmin works with. He has two lives. Well, he's retired now, but he has two lives where he was juggling being the principal of a primary school up at near Mildura, but he also has another in his heart, probably equally important, is the production of food, is in the particularly citrus and pistachio and avocados. That is a very different part of his life, but equally important. So he's an example of someone who would be the one tier of who we have, and then we have a number of small producers, manufacturers who use produce that's grown locally to make something that they then sell. But the key to it is that it supports regional growers in the production of it. My organisation is Melbourne Farmers Markets. We're a not-for-profit company now. It started on my kitchen table in the early days, and we've established 8 farmers markets around Melbourne. My involvement is as a caterer in the first place, as trying to find a way in an industry that was there was a lot of competition, and what I believed was going to be a little bit of differentiation, and something that I believed in was buying directly, like some cheeses from Gippsland or the citrus from Mildura, for instance. And it was really challenging, even mid-80s and 90s, to actually be able to find those producers directly. It was all through a distributor and, you know, someone who was the middleman for it. And it stuck with me throughout that time, and I coped with the learning the industry. But once I got out, I changed worlds. I started writing for The Age, for the food section of The Age. And in a way I had a similar experience because being in the food media, we were bombarded with product and produce that had always had someone in the middle of it, or let alone one layer, and often several, including marketing companies and importers and so on. And it showed me that the food industry was not what I kind of naively thought it was in my own experience, which was growing up pretty close to the veggie garden and the chooks and so on. Fortunate enough to have that connection without actually living on the land. So eventually it coincided at a point where the Collingwood Children's Farm was being hugely challenged by residential development that was going to essentially close the farm. And it was a sort of community resource in the city that was very important to the local community. And so it coincided with me thinking, right, now's the time to start a market, to make sure that Melbourne, that celebrates food so greatly, continues to have a connection with the farming community that actually supplies it, let alone through the tiers up into, a magnificent restaurant industry and the tourism that is that's generated by the food industry in Victoria. So that was 2002, and we started, and it's been an incredible ride since then. A number of the markets in those days were just monthly. So together with 4 markets, we added up to having a market a week in Melbourne. And now we've progressed through the early days of sort of about 40 or 50 stallholders who were, as we know them, stallholders, coming to Melbourne, to now probably 500 or so who come to our various markets that are either monthly at the original ones, fortnightly in some suburbs around Melbourne, and now weekly at Melbourne University, which is the first step of hopefully a whole new, brave new world of and another life that I hope to find somehow in the waking hours. But it feels like a very important thing to do because there are very few opportunities where a producer themselves has a chance to connect with their customer, and there's where obviously they're proud of what they bring to market. It takes the anonymity out of growing something and sending it off to a wholesale market or to a larger organisation who don't give any of the credit back to the grower, and they add their margin and further up the chain, where the farmer is the person who's done the work but doesn't get the credit or the dollar. So at a farmer's market, they're running their own business. Once they arrive and in place, they're a autonomous little enterprise where they not only market themselves in the way that they want to present themselves and their produce, but they obviously take the full dollar and all the credit for the work. And incredible relationships have emerged over those years. Great friendships, incredible support mechanisms when things are tough. Jasmine mentioned Blakey, who's an extraordinary character in our world. Meg and Blakey are in in their late 70s now. They were burnt out in the Grampians fires in 2001, I think it was, and they're an example which I don't think they'll mind. They came brought by a neighbour who was trading at the markets in a completely depressed and broken state by what they'd been through. There was no means for them to sell their produce and get any thanks for it and feel any pride for it. Their region was decimated by the fire, and they were living in the shed. And gradually, you see people sort of unfold. They make friends. They seem to grow almost physically as people come back and tell them how much they appreciate it, the relationship that they have, something that they told them last week about another way to cook a cauliflower, or something about their region, or something about their grandchildren. It's a multi-layered and very personal thing we all share, and very precious. I think the on the other side is for the public. We have such a disconnect between our food producers generally. So the farmers market sort of recreate a community that revolves around food. That's also, apart from when a day like this, which of course we often get because we're outdoor and in Melbourne, but you can be thoroughly surprised by how wonderful the effort, the little bit of effort it takes to, stick on a jacket and go to a market and be appreciated by those food producers who see you coming, know your name, and have something excitedly to share with you across the table. I don't know, how am I going for time? Am I?
I didn't keep an idea.
Oh. Just tell me to shut up when you're ready. So there's a real sense of community about it. That's one of our most valuable things. But in real terms for individual producers, we're confident that we can make a bit of a difference. We're confident that we have to be confident that it's important work that the creation of a community, a sense of community, is valuable. In real terms, it's about employment, about engagement of young people, about keeping people on the land. One of the sort of culminations of great satisfaction for me was Twitter, 140 characters that we bang out on our phones, and I had a message from a veggie grower, and it was I'll extend it beyond 140 characters. It was something like 3 years ago I was working full time on another farm, and I did my first farmers market. Now I am farming my own 130 acres and employ 18 people. So it might be small in the scheme of things, but for each grower that comes along and has anything like that kind of change in their fortunes, in the sort of general sense of the word, including financial, we feel that's a huge win in local agriculture and regional communities. And essentially that's what makes us tick, and that's what makes us keep going with trying more, broadening things out. Obviously there's a lot more to do that's more about a broader access for communities to. It's all very well to be able to afford food that we choose to buy, and not all of us can. So now we're tackling as much as we can surpluses and excess and imperfects of local produce that might be redirected into other communities who can't afford the pleasures of food like we might be able to derive if we have the choice. but also into education and making sure that that everyone has the opportunity to understand how food is produced and how, if there is choice in our lives, that we can source ethically. We can play a part individually with the way that we spend our dollars, but importantly that it is appreciated by the regional communities who produce it, in the sense of their continued determination to stay on the land and to keep farming, because the key to it all is that if we don't have the food that they produce, then we're never going to. We can't afford to have the choice of what we eat. It's going to be dictated to us. And in recent cases of contaminated mixed berries, for instance, it's an example of how things get out of control and how our understanding of food labelling and fine print and ambiguous claims and marketing can really get out of control if we don't keep an eye on things. So I think that's probably most of my topics covered. I encourage you to find a farmers market, find an accredited farmers market. That's the key to making sure that it's the genuine model, the real deal, rather than there are markets that are sort of trading on the name of it, but so we encourage you to find an accredited farmers market, which is very easy to do on an internet platform somewhere, and I've brought some flyers of the markets that we operate, and if anyone's interested in finding out more, then I welcome your interest, and thank you very much.